ready? Let's do a little story time. A little over 40 years ago, on August 1st, 1981, MTV launched. The opening act was a sort of declaration where the Bugles with Video Killed the Radio Star sent a signal to the world that there was a significant technological and cultural change about to happen within the music industry. And today it's sort of hard to imagine a world where people don't know what videos are, yet that was the world that MTV was facing. The technology was new, unfamiliar to most people. And that novelty initially posed an issue for the MTV team. The first few years, MTV faced a rocky start. Conservative cable operators were not interested in putting them on their channels because they had fear of the cocaine culture or the combination of provocative imagery and rock and roll music corrupting the youth. Pearls were being clutched. Purity culture was being challenged. And for similar reasons, parents, educators, and religious leaders around the country resisted this change. Many cited things like the impact of cocaine, music video editing styles impacting the attention spans of the youth. Think about the children. We still see the detritus of this fight today in what we might recognize through the parental advisory sticker that ended up on most CDs and albums that were released in this era, starting in 1990. Many of MTV's heaviest artists were stickered. And beyond the moral fears, there was a significant pushback on the music industry from within. Musicians and musical artists were concerned that videos would distract from the craft of music itself, become more about image and marketing. Radio wasn't broken, why fix it? And these are different fears for sure, but at the root of it all is a resistance to change. The idea that novelty and change can feel like a threat to us and our established ideas of what reality is like. But as we know, MTV went on to be a roaring success. Despite all of those pushbacks and fears and threats, it revolutionized marketing, television, and music. It arguably even played a role in the fall of the Soviet Union, all because there were people who saw the potential and believed something could be done. And that's what I'm here to talk to you about today. MTV is a convenient example of this, but right now we're in a moment of significant political, cultural, and technological change, and it can feel scary and threatening for a lot of people. But what if instead we saw this moment as an opportunity and not a threat? Progress demands that. Obligatory introduction, I'm Joey Camire, Chief Strategy Officer and co-founder at a company called SYLVAIN, a strategy and design firm. Big changes in particular feel threatening when we're already operating in threat detection mode. I'd argue that many of us may be in that sort of default setting right now. From the news we read, to the devices we use, to the entertainment we consume, it keeps our minds oriented towards threat and change. We're living in what I would call a threat culture. And let's look at some examples. Things like Law and Order, or the biggest, most popular shows on TV are police and detective procedurals, shows that orient you towards the danger of what happens to you when you walk outside your door. And it starts early. Paw Patrol is arguably doing this for small children. What's the biggest trend in podcast content? It's true crime. And as of this week, the two biggest shows with the most reach in the world are Crime Junkie and Dateline, not Andrew Huberman or Joe Rogan or The Daily. And social media is probably one of the worst offenders. You can easily find doomsday content scrolling through any of your social channels, from apocalyptic predictions to anti-sleepover discourse, to elaborate Home Alone-style safety routines. We even have a word for compulsively consuming threat on social media. It's called doom scrolling. And even if you wanted to avoid this, it's hard to hide. There's constant push notifications, screens integrated into everything. Or we have the rise of surveillance culture with things like Ring doorbells, the Citizen and Nextdoor apps, neighborhood vigilantes, the advancement of parental controls and advanced baby monitors, normalized location sharing. And you can see this threat culture emerge in the way that we talk about technology and its future. Generative AI is a prime example. Not only will it take my job and your job, but it's coming to kill us all. The truth is that threat culture is thrilling. When there's a thrill associated with feeling like you're in danger. It's why we watch horror movies. You don't know what's going to happen. Your body starts releasing neurotransmitters and hormones like adrenaline. And that feeling can be super addictive, especially when threat isn't imminent. But we're tilting at windmills. We're fighting against imagined monsters that aren't actually under our bed. And we've reached a point where some or all of us we've reached a point where there's this compounding impact that the threats are creating, where we're having a visceral reaction of anxiety in many people that we see around us. It's not unlike having an allergic reaction. Pollen or pet dander are not actually going to be a danger to you, but repeated exposure puts your body on high alert. And then all of a sudden you start reacting as if they were a real danger, like a virus or bacteria. Our minds and bodies are having an allergic reaction to threat culture. And this allergy is manifesting in a lot of ways. I assume everyone here has heard some form of the phrase fight or flight. These are known as stress responses. When you really take a look at modern society, it's easy to see these reactions manifesting out in culture and the things that we encounter every day. The fighters take action to eliminate the threat. You can see it in things like the growing prepper community constantly taking steps to secure themselves and their families against some imagined apocalyptic threat. You see fight in climate activists throwing soup and other things on famous paintings in museums around the world. In the tech world, you see fight show up in anti-AI activism, people poisoning training data sets. And then we have flight. Flighters take action to escape the threat. You see flight in people who threaten to uproot their lives and their families to move to Canada or Europe if Trump wins the second term. You see flight show up in the mounting homeschool movement in the United States, where in the face of disbelief in public school systems, homeschooling is now the fastest growing education in the United States. In tech, it looks like people increasingly unplugging from social media, smartphones, and broader digital infrastructure, entirely removing themselves so that they can't be triggered by this threat culture. But there's another F that's existed as long in the academic literature, but is growing increasingly common in public discourse. And that's freeze, which is becoming immobile in response to a threat. You recognize this phrase in things that we say to each other every day, right? Phrases like being like a deer caught in the headlights or being stopped in your tracks. And when you're looking, you see this out in the wild too. It's so pervasive, in fact, there's a new term going around on social media to help us define this feeling, the idea of a functional freeze. Essentially, people overwhelmed by threat culture are finding it challenging to look into the future in any capacity. And it's not just something I suspect, the data is playing this out. 76% of people report feeling personally stuck, with 27% feeling locked into the same routines in their everyday life. It looks like not engaging in the political system out of disillusionment, but then also doing nothing to change it. It looks like worrying so intensely about the future of the economy that you wind up doing nothing to plan or save for your own financial future. And professionally, it's no different. You all know that. It's 75% of people report feeling professionally trapped, and 22% feel so stressed about it that they won't do anything. They're frozen. It looks like quiet quitting becoming the norm rather than just a flashy trend in listicles. There's even a new term called the big stay, which is sort of on the nose with being frozen. We become the dog in the room, right? Panicked, but remaining still. And it's understandable why we feel frozen when we're constantly being hijacked by this feeling of threat. If we view all change as threat, we're frozen as a defense mechanism. If you're thinking to yourself, oh, that sounds kind of like me, you're not alone, you're not crazy, there's nothing wrong with that. These are threat responses that are built into us biologically. It's what kept our ancestors alive. But these threat responses aren't serving us anymore. I fight for fairness. I freeze when my wife is mad at me. I flee from conversations about money. But maybe there's more to the story. There are also incredible strides being made by people around the world. Huge leaps being made in environmental technology and the energy sector overall. Renewable energy is now cheaper than fossil fuels, and the cost of a solar voltaic panel is 99.6% cheaper than it was in 1976. Electric vehicle sales are surging, getting us off of fossil fuels. And as much as we all, myself included, constantly think about the threats that our children face, the reality is that globally, kids are dramatically safer and healthier than they've ever been in the entirety of human history. Vaccination rates are climbing globally, including in poorer countries where 70% coverage is increasingly common. Drugs like PrEP have saved millions of lives and brought more safety and freedom to sexual health and discourse. And sure, on January 6th, the Capitol building was attacked. But 200 years ago, almost the entire world lived under a monarchy and lacked basic human rights. And today, 50% of the world lives in electoral democracies. Things are getting better. And there are good things happening if we're looking for them. The reality is that threat culture isn't serving us. We can stay frozen in the face of things that need to be fixed if we're focused only on threats. We need to move. We need to progress. We need to unfreeze. There's goodness on the other side if we do. But how? How do you unfreeze? We're proposing a fourth F that gives us more agency, framing the change in a new way, taking the facts of the situation and looking at them through the lens of possibility. It is possible to train yourself with agency instead of focusing on fight, flight, or freeze as these autonomic responses. Framing requires us to engage the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that's responsible for executive function and deliberate decision making. When we practice framing, we're disengaging the more primitive systems like the amygdala, which is part of what we literally call the lizard brain, and embracing the most involved parts of who we are. Look at how much bigger the prefrontal cortex is than the amygdala, and this is just the number of neurons. It's not even factoring the connectome and the exponential increase that you get by all of those neurons being connected. The prefrontal cortex helps us get to that place of purposeful movement, taking in all of the inputs, charting a reasonable path forward, and actually going for it. Framing allows us to step into the fullness of being an evolved human, going from reactive to actually make a choice. We have memes about this idea. I think it's something that we actively know is true. They're on the same bus, at the same time, in the same place, but the perspective, the way that they're framing the situation, changes everything. The founding team of MTV, I think, knew this too. Rather than immediately identifying change as a threat, they recognized that change is inevitable, and more importantly, that it can be exciting. They anchored in the facts of the new technology that was emerging in order to detect an opportunity. And it worked. Despite the threat culture that emerged surrounding the launch of MTV, it became a global phenomenon, launching the careers of major cultural icons that most of us would recognize, those who chose to lean in and see the opportunity as well. It drove significant sales and revenue. It even became a phenomenon in places around the world, like here in Brazil, where in 1990, the third iteration of MTV launched. ultimately, video opened doors for an absolute revolution in music, entertainment, and the technology that surrounded it. And we still see the impacts today. Video may have killed the radio star, but it created the MTV star, it created the YouTube star, it created the TikTok star. Brands, businesses, people, all of us, individuals, should be taking note of examples from history like MTV, because we're in the same kind of moment for so much emerging technology. Instead of fighting AI, saying things like, go fuck yourself, you're not an artist, or fleeing in a dead sprint from AGI because we don't even know how fast it can run, or freezing, fearing our inevitable decline into irrelevance, which also just sounds kind of like the normal aging process. We can frame the possibilities of AI or any other emerging technology. We make the effort to dispel and move beyond fear and threat and see that there's possibility. And possibility is what allows us to move forward, make progress, and ultimately architect tools and strategies for a more collective future. Because when we're doing that, we move from change being a threat to change giving us a chance to do something important. And we're sitting on a precipice. Economists and futurists like Carlota Perez are predicting an imminent eruption in innovation. We've been building incredible capabilities over the past 20 years around the world. 3D printing, blockchain technology beyond just crypto, LLMs, battery platforms, CRISPR, mRNA, drones, and many more things that are waiting to be implemented in meaningful ways that will change people's lives, but haven't yet. We shouldn't fight these things. We should see them as an opportunity by framing them that way. And it sounds simple enough, but it's not something you can just turn on. Framing is a practice, and so let's talk about a few ways that you can do that. The first is narrow your aperture. Pick a problem, hone in on it. When you frame, you're in an inherently selective state, focusing your attention in a specific way. There's a tendency today, like I talked about, to be pulled in all types of different directions, but that can be overwhelming and put us back into that freeze state. To make real progress, pick a problem, focus on it, and go for it. Become fluent in the technology that matters. Novel technologies become a lot less frightening when you're actually fluent in them. We've all seen politicians say stupid shit in congressional hearings because they have no idea what they're talking about, flabbergasted by the technology. If you can stay focused and oriented and become fluent in the technology, all of a sudden you can do something with it. And this is a room full of creative people. We need to embrace recombination. What creative people do best is take ideas and slam them together and recombine them into something magical. Threat culture is also inherently isolating, and you shouldn't go it alone. When you engage your brain around framing and by involving others in this process, understanding and possibility go further. After all, the best way to counter the hopelessness and frozenness that we're feeling is to band together and feel the power of being part of a collective. We try to put our money where our mouth is. We make these cards. This QR code is a way to get them for free. They can hopefully help you go through all those 4 steps. My timer is blinking. Here's where you can find us if you want to download our podcast or listen to our newsletter. But one last thing, I know many of you or some of you may be familiar with my dear friend and co-founder, SYLVAIN, who spoke on Web Summit stages around the world for many years. We loved and miss him, and losing him last year could have been a moment to put ourselves in that fight, flight, or freeze type of moment. But we're actively trying to practice what we preach and frame the situation and not succumb to those threat types of responses so we can continue to leverage the might of corporations for the greater good, like we set out to do in the beginning. Thank you.